give me, there you go. I think we're live. Perfect.
Awesome.
Hooray. Rebecca, thank you for joining me again. It's so good to see you.
Such a pleasure. I love talking with you, Sydney. It's really great.
I felt like when I went back and looked at our previous conversation, I was surprised that it was this year. It was in 2023 because I feel like I've known you since at least last year. I was really surprised to find out that we've only talked since 2023.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we have had 2 conversations, one on your channel, one on mine. So
That's true. Yeah. That's true. I feel like we're just ping-ponging it back and forth. And you introduced me to StreamYard, which has changed my life. So thank you for that.
Oh, good.
But one of the things that I know is a large part of your life, and I feel like a major part of your identity, is you talk about miracles. For people who haven't seen your episode yet or aren't maybe familiar with your channel, you are a devout Christian, correct? I can. Okay, I just want to make sure I label that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you hold miracles to a high esteem, and you do believe that miracles are real and they can be conducted, I believe is like I don't want to say a disrespectful terminology. And you told me last time that we talked that you had kind of focused on that area of your life, performing miracles for other people and bringing miracles to life. And I would just love to hear more about that and what you've been up to since we last talked about it.
Yes, and thank you for your audience. You know, I have to preface this by saying this is, I feel like, strangely, it's a little bit strange, but seems to be one of the most controversial things that I talk about, because I feel like there's a lot of trauma associated with, like, when you talk about miracles. There's a lot of people who have suffered and they needed a miracle, they wanted a miracle, and they didn't get a miracle. And so it's hard to talk about miracles that have happened when there's people who didn't experience a miracle. And so that's tough to wrestle with. And that's been one of the major things that I've wrestled with, is that why do I sometimes see a miracle for something that doesn't seem as important as, there's might be somebody dying of cancer and then they don't get a miracle, but somebody else gets, maybe a knee healed or something like that. Why? So this is one of the sticky subjects with miracles. And so, and then the other thing is that a lot of people have been hurt by faith healers that get people's money and put on a show. And, a lot of people have experienced either, just being victims of fraud, or just some kind of physical thing that they had a problem with. Maybe they were in a church that believed so much in miracles that they told people not to go to the doctor. Okay. And so I just want to say that, yes, I believe in miracles and I'm actively seeking miracles, but I also believe that doctors, hospitals, medicines, these are all good things. People should avail themselves of any type of healing that's available, right? As long as it's good and healthy and everything. I'm not talking about go to a witch doctor, but yeah. I mean, whatever, modern medicine has to offer, this is also ways that God has given us to be healed. And that for those who didn't get the miracle that they wanted, I'm sorry. And I don't know, I don't have an answer as to why people sometimes don't see the miracle. But for me personally, I've seen enough miracles now that I feel it would be negligent for me to not go and pray for people and believe and expect miracles, because I have seen the power of God in a lot of healing miracles.
Do you think, because I know that a lot of people think when, say, for example, they don't see a miracle happen that they're praying to happen, a lot of people think they didn't pray enough or they didn't pray the right way. Do you think that prayer and the amount or the strength or the correctness of which somebody's praying has anything to do with the outcome of whether or not they see a miracle?
The best answer I can give to that is I don't know. I don't think God is limited on power. But I do think there's a lot of things in the world that God, that God is not completely in control of everything that happens in this world. And there's lots of evil forces that come against us. And there's lots of, just there's a lot of different factors that could affect, but I definitely wouldn't put the blame on a person, like, oh, you should have prayed harder. Absolutely not. Like, I can't say why you didn't get your miracle, but I don't put the blame on you, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And when you are in pursuit of miracles, is it something that you study? Is it something that you practice for you personally? How do you, in your personal life, pursue miracles?
Yeah, well, I have studied. I've done quite a few things. I've read a lot of books on
Okay.
healing by people that, have had healing ministries. My favorite book on healing is by a Christian lady named Agnes Sanford. She's no longer alive, but she wrote a book called The Healing Light, and it's a beautiful book. I'm not saying that I agree with every single thing that she says, but I think it's just, she talks a lot about how healing, like in God's presence, God's love, um, and God's presence is healing. So what we're trying to do when we are praying for someone is really, we're trying to be communicators of God's love and his presence. And that if I'm giving myself as a vessel for God's love, then that is where healing takes place, is that I'm allowing God's power and his love to work through me. And that, in his presence, that is where the healing is found. So it's kind of like being a carrier of God's presence.
And so when people say that God is omnipotent and omniscient, he knows what's going to happen and he knows everything. Do you think that that is an argument that like prayer shouldn't necessarily be necessary in order to help people, like that he should already know that that person needs help? Or do you think that prayer is part of the way that he stays omnipotent and omniscient at the same time?
Wow, Sydney, this is $1 million question. I have wrestled with this so much. This is huge. And so, like, because in one sense, prayer makes no sense, right?
Right.
Like, why does God need me if he already knows what the person needs? He already knows what is necessary, and he loves the person more than I do. I probably love them like this much, and he loves them this much. So why would I even need to be involved in this process, right? Like, and so um I have to say that I don't fully understand prayer.
Yeah.
But the best that I can do to explain it is that, God didn't set up a world where he does everything. He actually set up a world where we have power, where we have responsibility. And he desires, the way he set it up, like it or not, is that he works through human beings. And if you look at all the miracles in the Bible, they're all done by people. Okay. So even when it's God's power that actually makes the thing happen, but there's always a vessel, and that vessel is a person, right? Even when the Red Sea parted, it was Moses who took his staff and God told him, put your staff in the sea. And so Moses was the vessel for God's power. And you see that all throughout the Bible. You see, Elisha laying on a dead boy, and the dead boy getting raised from getting resurrected. And then, Jesus coming into contact with people, the disciples coming in contact with people and healing them. So the miracles in the Bible are done through people, God's power working through people. And that's the way God desires to work.
Stephanie McGuire says, I think prayer works for a lot of people the same way that affirmations and positive self-talk works with our own intentions. Prayer has been shown to actually help people, I think, in actual studies. And I have heard this. I have heard some people say, I don't actually necessarily know that I believe in prayer, but I do believe in the feeling that I get when I pray. I still joke with people all the time that when there's too much turbulence on a plane, I even still pray,
Yes.
because there is a feeling related to that, almost like a meditation. And then Moon Shoes, hey Moon Shoes, thanks for joining us again. He says, studies I've seen shows prayer works at about the same rate as chants. So we've kind of got, two conflicting ideas going there. Do you think that, I suppose I should say, why do you think that if God knew, and just in your opinion, if God knew that he needed to use human beings as a vessel to make his miracles happen and to heal other human beings, why do you think he made man imperfect if those were the vessel for his miracles?
Well, did he make us imperfect? I think he made us very good. That's what the Bible says, that he made us very good. And this was actually one of the things that you talked about, was like, kind of, you grew up with an idea that like people are bad, like no one's good, right?
Right.
And now there's a few verses in the Bible that say that, none of us are righteous, no, not one. But you know what? There's also hundreds of verses in the Bible that talk about righteous people. So the Bible is full of statements about our goodness and about what it looks like to be righteous, to be honest, to care for the poor, to be, fair in your dealings with people. And so there's, we may be imperfect vessels, but we can still be good vessels for God's love and power. Mm-hmm.
I like that answer a lot. And so why do you think, or do you agree, that miracles have changed over time? In the Bible, we hear about burning bushes and parting seas and things like that. What do you think is a modern miracle now? Or do you think they're the same, we just attribute them to something different?
Oh, I think they're the same. I mean, if there was a need for the sea to part, I'd totally be like, give me my staff and pray for the sea to part. So I still think God is doing astounding miracles today. I think actually, I believe he probably did more miracles today than all of the miracles mentioned in the Bible. So I think, there's a great underestimation of what God is doing in the world, and that he is doing many miracles. He's raising people from the dead. He's healing blind eyes. He's doing all the things that we see him doing in the Bible. Now, now the parting of the Red Sea, okay, now, that may not be necessary. I mean, what I mean is, like, we may not see the exact same miracle happen again and again, but the same types of things. And I think definitely where people are involved and needing healing, and God is there. And so he is just as much a God of miracles today as anything written in the Bible.
And what was an example of something that you saw or read about? Maybe you saw it in person or on the news, and you said that for sure is a miracle.
Yeah, well, I have some experiences, my own personal experiences, and then I do believe, one of the things that I've done in my study of miracles is pay attention to the miracle workers around the world. And I do think that there are some miracle workers who've done as many miracles as Jesus, maybe even more. And so I can talk about some of them, but I would say in my life, what I have seen, I've seen some things that were quite astounding. And one of them was a man that came to my Bible study. It was the first time he had ever come to Bible study. He was a Turkish man, and he worked at a car wash, and I had invited him to Bible study, but he could never come because he was always working at that time, until he slipped on ice and broke his arm. And then he was able to come to Bible study because he broke his arm, so he couldn't work.
Yeah.
So he came to Bible study. It was his first time reading the Bible.
Wow.
And he had a sling on his arm. His arm was broken in two places, and he was supposed to have surgery. They told him he was going to need surgery to put metal plates in his arm. So he his arm was in a sling, and we were reading the Bible, and the passage we were reading was from Matthew chapter 9. And it was the passage where the friends like lowered the paralyzed man before Jesus, and Jesus said to the man, your sins are forgiven. And then the religious people were like, who can forgive sins? And Jesus is like, well, so that you may know that I have the authority to forgive sins, take up your mat and walk. And so then he healed the man. So we got done reading that story, and this Turkish man, his name was Oğuz, he was like, I just want to know that my sins are forgiven. And so I went over to him. I just pulled up a chair next to him, and I said, Oğuz, your sins are forgiven. And he said, really? And I said, yes, in Jesus' name, your sins are forgiven. And then I told him, and after Jesus forgave the man's sins, he healed him. So now we're going to ask Jesus to heal your arm. And so I just put my hand lightly on his arm, and I started to pray for him. And about a minute into my prayer, maybe even 30 seconds, he said, he interrupted me, and he was like, I feel a heartbeat in my arm. And then he I just kept praying. I was like, oh, good, great, and I just kept praying. And then within a minute, he stood up, took off his sling. And you have to understand, this is a really weird moment, because I had other Turkish friends in the room that they weren't yet believers in Jesus, right? And they weren't even believers in miracles, really. So they're watching him take this sling off, and they're going, no, what are you doing? And he said, no. He said, there's no pain. And he started waving his arm around wildly. And he was taking deep breaths. And he was like, this is the first time I've been able to take a deep breath, since my arm broke. And he was so happy. And so we were all like, wow, awesome. And then it's where do you go from there? But we just kept reading. We just went back to reading the Bible, and he's now holding the Bible in his hand in a way that he couldn't do before. He actually, then he got afraid that we weren't going to believe that he, that his arm was broken. Cause this is a really weird circumstance. So he actually got up, and he went to the coat closet and got his jacket, and he had a folded up piece of paper, and he was like, look, this is my medical report. This is what the doctors,
wow.
He was like, my arm was broken. Look at this report. And so I couldn't read it. It was in Turkish, but my Turkish friends were all looking at it, and they were like, wow. And so anyway, we then we just kept reading, and it was just kind of a beautiful moment. And then at the end, he was like, I can't believe I'm reading the words of God. And I don't know, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. Also, I don't know that I've met one Turkish person, let alone a room full of Turkish people. So that alone has me that's a wild story in itself.
Well, we lived in Turkey. So we we were.
I thought this was in your current neighborhood. I was like, really?
Huh. No, we lived in Turkey for 4 years. We lived in Jordan for 3 years, and we lived in Dubai for 3 years.
That makes way more sense. I thought you just happened to live in a pocket of Turkish people somewhere. Very interesting. Now, what do you say is the difference between praying over somebody and their broken arm healing in that moment and magic? Because, with magic, you say a spell, and then you sometimes lay hands, and the thing happens according to people who believe in magic. What do you think separates being able to call God's work miracles versus calling it magic in the same way that some people believe?
Well, it's kind of the same substance of stuff, isn't it? It's power that you wouldn't really expect to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so the difference between, and you could call magic that's done through, you could kind of use the terms interchangeably. But I would say the difference is that I'm drawing on God's power. And so the source does matter, because there are sources that will heal you, that are not from God. And you're kind of making an exchange because they get something that those sources have desires to get something from you, and they will get something from you later, even if at the time you're just, happy about your healing. So you do have to be careful about which source of power you're tapping into. So I don't recommend that people look for like spiritual healing from spirits that are not God.
Yeah, do you mean I was about to ask if you meant like dark, like
Yeah.
the Satan or like dark magic, things like that?
Yes.
Do you think there is such a thing as the opposite of a miracle? Like something
Well,
happening to somebody because they in that, say for example, in that sort of way, like a dark magic miracle, which is like the opposite of what you'd want?
absolutely. Oh, yes. Yes. In fact, I mean, I had a Satanist on my channel. And he, I totally believe in his abilities, right? Like he's like, oh yeah, I practice black magic if I need healing or if I need something, for myself. And maybe I wouldn't believe every person that told me that, but I felt that I knew him well enough to say I believed in his ability. Yeah.
And do you think that, say for example, I were a Satanist and I were
Mhm.
performing what I consider Satanist miracles, do you think that that can be done in a positive healing way? Or do you think that as long as it's being done in the name of Satanism, it's going to be a negative thing?
I think it may have positive, like there may be people who are like, oh yeah, see, I truly benefited from it, but I do think there is a trade-off because you are dealing with spiritual beings that don't have your best intentions in mind. They do want to harm you. They may give you a benefit, but they will eventually, it will end up coming back to you in
Got
a
it.
difficult way. Yeah,
They'll
like
do what
in
you
something
need,
bad.
but they'll
Yeah.
collect their debt.
Yes.
Got it. Do you ever feel like you've had a moment where you experienced Satan or the devil or
Oh
that
yeah.
sort of thing?
Yes.
And did you know in the moment, or was it upon reflection that you were like,
Well, I've had a lot of moments. Okay. So I even look, this is wow. I can't believe it. Am I going to talk about this publicly? But I did have a demon one time. Okay. And so that was really tough because I didn't know how to get rid of it. But I'm not sure I'm ready to tell that story publicly
sure,
because wow, it's just,
it's a
yeah.
lot? Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I can even say that, like it's not okay, it's both serious and not serious. What I mean is Jesus has the power to overcome all. People are probably dealing with, spiritual forces more than they recognize, but they don't have to. If you're not I don't know. Like I wow, should I even get into this?
I can move on if you want me to. I got
Well, let me give you an example of what, like an experience that, like, I don't think somebody would mind me sharing. Well, maybe I better not. Okay, I have to get permissions before I
yeah.
share these things.
Yeah, we can move on. No worries. No worries.
Yeah.
Um, do you think that modern medicine is a miracle, or do you think that's one of the forces you were talking about that aren't necessarily a force of God, even though they help you?
Well, I think I wouldn't say modern medicine is well, it depends what you mean by miracle, because if you just think of a miracle as like a wonderful work, and that might be the best way to that might be the most accurate way to describe a miracle. And so it's like a an a wonderful work, a display of power.
Mhm.
And certainly there is some stuff in modern medicine that we could say that is a wonderful work. And so in that way, it's a miracle. So, but I do think when I use the term miracle, I usually mean a display of God's power rather than like a display of like human ingenuity or like, but I mean, but it doesn't have to be a totally separate category.
Yeah.
God can use doctors. God can be involved in the process. God can help us, with medicines and things like that. So, sometimes it's actually hard to discern when something is like, when there's like natural healing involved, like natural healing properties in the body, doctors, or God's power, so it's not always like this like clear line. So like when I tell the stories about miracles, I usually try to tell the stories where it seems clear that there was no, you know, eh, no like normal, natural human intervention that was what caused the person to be healed. And in my friend's case with the broken arm, he did go back to the doctors and they were like really surprised. And they said, you don't need any surgery.
Wow.
So he didn't have to have anything done. And so he was like totally healed.
That's awesome. And has there
Yeah.
ever been, I know we've talked about things that are miracles being attributed to something else. Has there ever been a time where somebody told you about a miracle and you were sure it was not a miracle?
Yes.
What's like an example of that?
Well, actually, this has happened a lot, and maybe I don't want to like accuse one person specifically, but I would just say this. I've learned as someone who prays for people for healing that people lie. And
Yes. Yes.
actually, people I pray for have lied to me. So there have been people
Wow.
who pretended they got healed in the moment because they wanted to please me, or maybe it was just, I don't know, like exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
So like I've kind of learned like I'm skeptical when I pray for people because
Which is
um
sad. That's sad that you
right.
have to
But
feel
I
that
mean,
way.
I think a lot of the lies are like good intentioned lies, because it's like they don't want to disappoint. They
Yeah.
want you to think that you helped them, right?
Right.
And so like I would say that's the main motive when people are kind of not being honest about what's happening, is they're good intention. They want to be better, right? Or they want to believe that something happened and
Right.
it didn't really, or they just want you to believe you helped them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's good intentioned lies, but I do have to watch out for that. And I am careful. And I have discovered people lied before. So,
Yeah, and how do you discern, how do you discern when somebody's telling you the truth? Like obviously with the idea of like a broken arm, right? You can tell if you really want to whether or not an arm is broken. But like how do you know whenever you're healing somebody or whenever you're trying to pray for a miracle for them whether or not they're lying to you other than maybe it's somebody that you trust because you're close to them?
yeah, so I don't always know. And that's why I don't always believe. Um that's I don't always believe. So I try not to report it unless I feel that I had enough like signs on my own that they actually had the condition, or that their condition is actually healed, if that makes any sense. Or
Yeah.
like a reason to trust them, like there's somebody I know personally and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have you ever had a miracle performed on you or for you?
Yes. Um and like that's actually I feel kind of bad. You know how like there's the story in the Bible of like Jesus healing 10 lepers and only one comes back to thank him? Well, I had something like that happen to me because in my like when I was 21, I was not following the Lord. Okay, like I was totally doing whatever I wanted. I was not I mean,
Interesting. That's so
okay.
interesting given what I know about you now. Like that was ever your life.
Yeah, so I was like totally not following the Lord. And I mean, I believed in God, okay, but
Right.
I only
Right.
prayed to him when I really needed him.
Right.
Okay. It's like the turbulence on the airplane kind of thing. Okay, like
Yes.
that was how I treated God.
Yes.
So me and my sister were gonna go to Mexico on
Okay.
a month long like backpacking, through Mexico trip. But
Wow, a
I
month.
was
That's a
in
long time.
I was in an army school right before that where I was doing a lot of walking, a lot of running, and I ended up getting stress fractures. And I
Ooh,
really wanted to pass the school. So I just was taking pain medication, and like kind of making my stress fractures worse throughout
yeah.
throughout the month. But I got done with the school, and then I went to the doctor and I got, they said, okay, you've got stress fractures, you've got to be on crutches. Well, that didn't go well with my plan to go to Mexico, because
Right.
I had planned to right after graduation. I was going to go. I already had my plane tickets and everything. But so I was like, okay, I'm going to Mexico. I had my backpack and I had my crutches. And I get to Mexico. I meet my sister there. We're all happy. We're all excited. But I mean, honestly, what am I doing in Mexico on crutches, with a backpack? It's like, it hit me when I got there, because I had so much pain going from the airport and all, like the walking that I had to do to even get to our hotel. And then my sister wanted to go out dancing that night.
Oh,
And
no.
I was like dancing, and I thought, what am I going to do? I'm here for a month. I mean, so I was like, I didn't want to like say no. So I was like, okay, we'll do it. But I prayed and I was like, God, like, please help me, heal me. And what's crazy is I went out dancing with my sister, and I remember that I was in pain when we went to go dancing, but I danced that night. Okay. And I don't remember when the pain left, but the pain never came back. And so I got totally healed. But I don't think I really acknowledged God after that. I don't even know what happened to the crutches. Actually, I can't even remember if I brought the crutches home. I don't know what happened, but I know that I never needed them again on that entire trip. And so I was totally healed. But like, I didn't really I hope I thanked God for doing that, but it didn't register in my mind. Like, it actually didn't occur to me like, wow, this is an astounding miracle that happened to me. Maybe I should
Right.
change my life and pay more attention to God. Maybe I should
Right.
care about him. Maybe I should give him the time of day. It didn't occur to me. I just went on with
Yeah.
my life. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those in hindsight, you're like, "Man, I really hope I was grateful for that. I don't remember, but I hope I said it." It's like the same when like your grandparents send you a card or something. You're like, "Did I thank them? Did I call them? I don't remember. I hope so."
Yes,
Um, Very
totally.
interesting. Has there ever been a time, maybe when you were younger or at your current age, where you really prayed as hard as you could for a miracle to happen that did not happen and was like difficult for you to kind of come to terms with?
That's happened a lot of times. I mean, I have things that I'm praying for right now that have not happened. And that continues to be hard. Like, and I would say that is why miracles is one of the greatest struggles that I have in faith. Some people think, oh,
Interesting.
if I saw a miracle, I would believe. Well, for me, actually, the miracles make things a little bit harder and more complicated. It makes
Interesting. Why
so
is
like,
that?
well, because you know so I have seen, and I've seen other miracles like the one I described with the instant healing of the broken arm. I've seen other things like that. I've seen a paralyzed boy, when we prayed for his leg, he was able to lift his leg. Like, so I've seen God do these types of things, but then it's like, there's then once God can do that, and you believe in God's love and his goodness, and you're like, and it's so easy for you, God, then that actually makes the when you don't see it, it makes it harder. Okay.
Oh,
So
interesting.
the week before I saw the paralyzed boy lift his leg, when I went to go pray for that paralyzed boy, I had almost I was like so in such a bad place about miracles, because the very week before that, I had prayed for a 20-year-old who had cancer, and he died like 2 days after I prayed for him. And I just when I went to pray for him, you see a 20-year-old and you're like, God, I mean, you love this person. Surely you want this person to live. Like, I had such a strong belief that God would heal that 20-year-old, and then to see him die. And then to be asked to go pray for a paralyzed boy. So then I go to pray for this paralyzed boy, and I'm like, I got nothing. Like, I got nothing. I got nothing for you. You know, I don't believe right now. Like, and so, but then, you know, paralyzed boy lifts his leg, gets the feeling back in his legs, and then is able to actually raise his leg and wiggle his toes like 4 times. That, you know, and so, and another miracle happened that night. But but do you see what I mean? How it actually like makes it
100%.
harder? Like when
100%. Yeah.
so like when you see like great things, then it's like, wow, that's so amazing. Woohoo, woohoo.
Yeah.
But then you have to experience with more pain the people that don't get healed, because you know that God's power is there, and he loves them. And so it's kind of like, why not? You know?
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I feel like we've all had that experience where somebody or something, maybe it's a job, maybe it's an organization we're in, just won't meet a certain need. They just won't do it. They won't do it. They won't do it. And then you see them do it for somebody else. And before you were like, oh, they can't do it, so I should manage my expectations. But now you're like, oh, they can do it, just not for me. Got it. Interesting. And it kind of makes you a little salty because you're like,
Yes.
okay, like I almost wish I hadn't seen that, just so I could continue to believe that it's just without, there's a reason that it just can't happen.
Exactly. Sydney, you just have such a way of putting things. You are great. It's awesome. Like, that is exactly how it feels. It's like, and that's why I said, like, I think in some ways Christians who don't really believe or expect miracles, in some ways that would be easier. It'd be like, okay, whatever happens in life, no matter what suffering, no matter what, you're just going to stick it out. You're just going to deal with it. And that's it. Like, you don't have any great expectations, then you don't get disappointed too much. But that's why for me, like, this wrestling with this has been I think it's probably the biggest struggle and ongoing struggle in my faith.
Absolutely. That makes absolutely perfect sense. Secular Rarity says, so what is your answer to that, Rebekah? Does that just fall under God has higher reasons? ? Like, is there do you think a reason for why he won't meet those needs sometimes?
Secular Rarity. Awesome. I'm so glad you're here. And that's a great question. I personally don't like to put the blame on God. So I don't, that could be true. Okay. But what I see from God, most commonly, like when I think about who God is in the Bible, and I see Jesus, when people brought sick people to Jesus, it said he had compassion on them and he healed them all. And when I think about what God is planning in his kingdom, it says there's no sickness in his kingdom. There's no more crying. There's no more pain. So when I think of sickness and disease and even death as God's enemies, and that those are things that, like, if God's will were always done on the earth, then people would be healed. So I tend to think that it is God's will to heal, and there's a lot of messed up stuff in the world that causes God's will not to be done. Like, is it God's will that, people are getting blown up in various places? No, that's not God's will. And so, like, we pray, God, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So I try not to put the blame on God, but I do have to admit that in the Bible, there are times when God actually gave people diseases, and, he sent them plagues and things like that. So, like, there are times when, like, that happens. And then, but, like, if Jesus is the exact, Hebrews says he is the exact representation of who God is. And Jesus never did that. Okay. So Jesus to me, is our display of actually what God's ideal is. And so, we see Jesus, everyone who came to him got healed.
Would you say that Jesus is more perfect than God?
No, because they are one and the same.
Ah,
So, so the way that I kind of see it is like, when God sent plagues on people in the Old Testament, that was that was not what God's ideal was. God's ideal was for them to straighten up and not have to have a plague sent on them to straighten them up, right? So like it's kind of like how when I'm dealing with my children, okay,
I was
like
just about to say, it sounds like a parent. Yeah.
my children see the worst side of me. I'm sorry, because like I have to care about their behavior. So like no one else sees the nagging version of me. Okay. Like, and I don't like to be that nagging version. I don't like to be the person who's like, why didn't you clean your room? Why didn't you do your homework? Why do you have this grade in this class? Like, I don't want to be that person. Like, I would rather live and let live and everybody be happy. But I'm actually responsible for their behavior. So they end up seeing the nagging me, right? And that's not the side of them I actually want to show, right?
Right.
But that's the side that I have to show. And so I think like a lot of times when God is dealing with people, he is dealing with them because they're doing horrible things and they have to be corrected. And so like, God gave Egypt a chance to repent and do what he said before he sent plagues on them. Okay. So it wasn't God's ideal to send plagues. But but the beautiful thing is that in Jesus, right? Jesus has taken our sins. So like God is no longer needs to deal with us in the same way anymore because he's given us something different. And so, in Christ, we're born again. We have the power of the Holy Spirit, and he doesn't have to deal with us in the same way that he used to.
And you said something super interesting earlier, and I don't know if you had meant to kind of juxtapose it the way you did, but you were talking about the young man, the 20-year-old who you prayed over and you prayed for a miracle and he died anyway. And then, the next day or very soon after, you had to pray over the little boy and you said, I've got nothing for you. And still he was able to move his legs. Do you think, in your opinion, that because you were saying, I have nothing left, there's nothing left for me to give you, I don't know that I even believe in this anymore, do you think that's why it worked? Do you think it was like his way of being like, I know I'm losing you, I'm going to show you proof, right? Like, I'm just out of curiosity because I thought that was interesting.
Well, I think that, one of the principles in healing, and I'm not saying this is a rule, but it is a principle. When somebody has faith, that's a great environment for healing. And I can say that when I went to pray for the paralyzed boy, I didn't have the faith that night. So it wasn't my faith working. But I do believe my friend who was also praying for him, her faith and the faith of the family was at work. And so, I think like, I don't think God was like, trying to keep me. I don't know. It's hard to say. These are the types of questions that like it's impossible to answer. All
Right.
I can do is just speculate.
Right.
Yeah.
We were talking about miracles and we were talking about kind of the size of former miracles like parting the Red Sea and the burning bush and the
Yeah.
plagues and things like that. Although I guess a plague technically isn't a miracle, but like these are large acts of God. And you mentioned how you think that like large acts of God still exist, that they haven't, sized down in any way or modernized necessarily. Um, I know we've talked in the past about how you don't believe in evolution.
Mhm.
So what is it about evolution that makes you think that couldn't have been a miracle of some sort that happened? Like a large miracle?
Oh yeah, I mean it could be. Like I'll grant that. I mean God can do whatever he wants. If he wants to make people evolve through a process of millions of years, who am I to disagree, right? So I have to grant that sure God could do that.
Oh,
But
interesting.
why don't I believe it? Well,
Yeah.
I secular rarity, if he's still watching, he's probably not going to like this, but I don't think that, evolution is good science. So I don't think we have like strong scientific reasons to believe in evolution. Now, if we did have strong scientific reasons to believe in evolution, I might be more inclined to believe it. But yeah, I think like I think we can show that evolution actually it works in the wrong direction. We devolve, we don't improve. Generally speaking, organisms do not improve. Our genome is deteriorating. And so, yeah.
I think one of my favorite moments, I don't remember, I think it was when I was on your channel. I don't remember if it was when you were on mine or when I
Mm-hmm.
was on yours, but one of my favorite moments with you was when I told you that I thought my parrots had descended from velociraptors, and you laughed so hard. You were like, "Are you serious?" And then you just laughed so hard. That's one of my favorite moments, because what I love about it is that um we disagree on things that should fundamentally make us like, butt heads and be like enemies or something. But I feel like those fundamental differences are actually what make us like good friends, are actually what make us like conversationalists. The differences, and then our willingness to like ask each other questions and actually listen to what the answer is. There are many things I think that we disagree on that people think should be like just like a deal breaker. Like, I can't even talk to you. I
Mm.
can't even, but for some reason, I just feel like I feel like whenever we're talking, it's like two old friends talking, even if we're kind of ribbing each other about things that we disagree with. And I also feel like it helps keep perspective. If you only surround yourself with people that entirely agree with you, you aren't going to, one, learn, grow in any way, but two, I think everybody should put themselves in positions where they have to kind of defend what it is they believe, and they have to defend their thoughts to an extent. Because I just think that's healthy intellectually. I think that's healthy socially. But yeah, I always think about that. Every once in a while, I'll think about that when I'm like playing with my birds, and one of them like reminds me of a dinosaur. I'll think of that moment where I'm like, I really think they evolved from raptors, and you're just laughing at me. But is there have you received a lot of judgment from people when you say that you believe that miracles are real, or do you tend to
Yes.
what does that feel like, or what do they usually say when they're having those moments of judgment?
Well, and this is I mean, as you know, like on my channel for the past couple of years, and I'm moving away from this, but I spent a lot of time talking to atheists, and I would say this is the one of the topics that really upsets them, really, really bothers them. And I think I already mentioned, some of the reasons why. It's because it people cannot wrap their head around why a miracle would happen in one situation and not in another, when the one situation would seem more needful, right?
Right.
And so that's frustrating for people. And then the fraud, and then I think it's just unbelief. Like, people have actually accused me of lying, and I'm fine with that. Like, I understand if there's something that I'm saying that doesn't fit within your worldview, that sounds impossible. It makes sense to just disbelieve, right? And you have to come up with a reason for that. So, okay, believe that I'm lying. I understand that. So, but it does seem to anger people more than some of the other topics that I talk about.
Yeah, which is interesting and also entirely believable for sure. Like, it's interesting to me that that's kind of the thing that sets people off. And somebody also, by the way, Secularity said, totally. Rebecca is very kind and respectful, in conversation. Definitely a Christian channel I am comfortable pointing people towards.
Thank
And some of
you.
the nicest followers I've received on my channel came from your channel, like some of the nicest, kindest people.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out. But yeah, I can absolutely see. I think people I think sometimes Christianity, and this is just me speculating based on things that I've heard and opinions that I've heard from people, and maybe my own personal thoughts in some degree. I think when people hear Christians say things like, God has a plan, right? God has a reason for everything. When these bad things happen to them, I think, one, it it's very interesting because it's almost like they need kind of a direction to point that pain and anger in. And it's
Mhm.
interesting to me how many people don't believe in God, but also point their anger at God, which is interesting. Because you're like, so does
Yeah.
that mean that he's real and you're angry at him, or are you truly an atheist? You don't believe in him? Um, which I think is like an interesting, and I think when they stop to think about it, they're not actually angry at God, and that's when they turn the anger more towards Christianity and like the faith. But I also think it's very interesting when somebody gets news that they don't like, or they get an answer they don't like, they automatically turn to the fact that you're lying. That must be it. It's either that God is real and he has it out for me and he's not going to help me, therefore I'm angry at him, or it's you must be lying because if God was real, he wouldn't, allow this to happen, or something like that. And I will say, I have never once gotten the vibe from you that you were lying about anything, right? Even on the topics
Mm.
that we disagree on. I think there's never been a moment where I didn't think you 100% believed what you were saying. Even if
Mm.
what you were saying was, I don't know, like, I'm not sure of this answer. This is a $1 million question. So that is interesting that people would accuse you of lying. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and they also give me, like, basically I get the vitriol that would be pointed toward every bad practice, like, by every faith healer. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So,
Yeah.
like, and it's, yeah. So, yeah.
I
But I thought it was interesting what you said about, people saying everything happens for a reason. God has a plan for everything. The Bible actually does not say that.
Right. Right.
In fact, the
Most
world is a
Christians hate that phrase.
chaotic, yeah,
Yeah.
the world is a chaotic mess. We don't always have an explanation for why horrible things happen. A lot of horrible things happen because people do horrible things to each other. A lot of horrible things happen because, nature is out of control. A lot of horrible things happen just, there's so many reasons for bad things happening, but, you know, the Bible doesn't tell us that God has a plan, or like a reason to do all of these things. He's not the actor in every evil event. And but he does tell us that he has a plan to restore all things and to turn everything bad that happened to us into something good later. I think of it as a mosaic. God takes our broken pieces. He takes all the pieces of the broken parts of our lives and things, and he will make it into something beautiful. So he will do that. And so we can trust in him because he is good, he's powerful, he loves us. And so things don't always go, in the greatest ways, but God will eventually restore all things.
Do you truly believe that
Yeah.
that God will restore all things? I think that there is a there's a part of, and this is just from my perspective, I think there's a part of atheism that allows people peace, in that if you're a Christian and you think that God has failed you, it's very, very painful. And you think that God
Hmm.
is
Yes.
granting people miracles that you could use very much, and you're, for whatever reason, not getting them, is very painful. But when you don't believe in God at all to begin with, there's nobody
Yes.
who's being mean to you or failing you. So it's almost like a more peaceful existence. Um,
Absolutely. I
yeah.
could not agree with you more. And actually, that is the most understandable reason for atheism. If somebody has a traumatic event in their life, then you have to face something hard, and that is, okay, God, basically he didn't love me enough to save me from this, or he basically he didn't care enough, or, yeah, I mean, there's, or he wasn't powerful enough, or he's not there.
Yeah.
And, like, sometimes the easier that I mean, the easiest option from those is just that he's not there, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's so that is understandable. The hard option is what I think is the true option, and that is, God loves me, God does care about me, and this thing happened. And to allow those things to exist, those ideas to exist simultaneously and to live with not having an explanation.
Yeah. And the living with that, I think, is the tough part for some people,
Yeah.
is this idea that, like, I have this person or this being in my life that has proven that he can fix all of these things for all of these people, so why not me? Like, what? And, meanwhile, there's the other half that's like, there's nobody there to do it, so the fact that it didn't happen is not shocking, by any means. Yeah, I can see how that would be incredibly painful for somebody to think basically that they're a lot of churches tell you to consider God your father, and their father has failed them or has abandoned them or left them in their time that they needed him most. So I can absolutely see how that would be super duper painful. Somebody
Yeah.
asked a question. Omni Kevlar, he says, IDK, if this was asked earlier, but if someone has sin or a demon, or is there another factor within our control to increase, decrease the success rate of faith healing? Do you think there is a way that, like, people can increase their ability to have miracles happen to them? If I'm asking this correctly, Omni Kevlar, correct me in
Yeah.
the comments.
Well, I mean,
We
you
talked
know,
kind of about this a little bit
look,
earlier.
I'm an amateur, okay? So, like, I'm not sure I'm qualified to, like, and that's another thing that I've done is go to people to who actually do a lot of miracles, okay? And I've learned some things from them, and I do believe that what the probably the biggest thing that does affect your ability to be a vessel of God's power is your um, closeness with God.
Yeah.
The more that you know God's love, the more that you experience God's love, the more you experience his presence, the more time you spend in his presence, the more that you communicate his presence to other people. And so I do believe that. And that's why when I say I'm seeking to become a better miracle worker, that's the way that I'm seeking to become closer to God so that I can be a better vessel for his love and power. The closer I am, the more that I know his love and experience his love. And I have seen this in my life. I have seen periods of time in my life when I was the closest to God where I experienced his power, like, very regularly for healing. And so I want to always be that way and even more close.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mhm.
again, it's the way that you say things like that. That's when I'm like, I don't think you're lying about anything that you're saying. I fully think that you believe 100% of what you're saying. You say it with,
Mhm.
I hate to use the word conviction because I feel like conviction implies like dishonesty. I don't like the word conviction.
Mm.
I know that that's not always what it means, but you say it with like a genuine, I'm trying to think of a word better than conviction. I'll say conviction, but like you say it with like a genuine honesty that I appreciate. Is there a question about miracles or not about miracles, just in general, that you've ever wanted to ask an atheist person that you haven't got to ask them?
Well, what do you hear, like, miracle reports? I kind of wonder, Sydney, because I hear miracle stories all the time. Not only have I experienced them, but I mean, I hear about them regularly. So I'd like to know, what do you or your viewers, what do you do with those stories? Like, how do you process them?
I think that miracles and miraculous things can happen. I don't attribute them to God, if that makes sense. I do think that there are things that happen where we cannot explain why. I do think there are things that happen that should not have happened, right? People survive illnesses they never should have survived. They survive wars and natural
Yes.
disasters and financial hardships and things where you're just like, how did they do that? That is a miracle. But I don't think that it was God who caused the miracle, or who what's the word I'm looking for? Who had anything necessarily to do with the miracle. I think sometimes, just like I don't understand everything there is about science, but I trust in science, and I believe I have seen enough scientific evidence for the things that I support and the things that I believe to feel comfortable in those beliefs. I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you exactly why it is that some people die of some diseases and some people survive. I don't know why 21 people die in a house fire and the 22nd person survives. I'm not sure why these things happen. I do think miraculous things happen every single day. And
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes if we were to really look into them scientifically, we might find a reason. For example, maybe that last person's vents were closed on their bedroom, and so the smoke didn't quite get in the same way, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or they took a medication earlier that, makes them breathe more shallow or something like that. But I also think that people are inherently good, and I don't think that morality has to exist through religion. I think you can be a very moral and good person and do very wonderful things for people,
Mm-hmm.
without necessarily having to be a religious person or attribute it to a god of any kind. And so I hear those stories and I love those stories. I love stories of miracles happening and wild things happening, and stories that we just like, I can't, if I didn't see it with my very eyes, I wouldn't believe it. But I think the only difference is Christians say that's God's doing, right? And I say, what a wonderful thing that happened
Yeah.
today. There's no explanation. We may never have an answer for it. But I'm glad that it happened. And in my opinion, it was, in fact, a miracle. I also believe in things like karma. I believe in karma the same way I believe in miracles. Sometimes people get karma they deserve, sometimes they don't. And even though we wish they did, um, and I think that people who put as much good into the world as they can often have good things come back to them, and people who put bad things into the world will eventually get their comeuppance. But I don't attribute that in any way to a spirituality or a spiritual belief of any kind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I know that it's 7 o'clock and the chat just got to hopping, so I feel bad that
Oh,
we
really?
yeah, it did. It did. I don't know if
Well,
you
I'm fine if you want to keep going, but if you may have something to do
Yeah,
now.
I've got
So
like 5 minutes and then I'm teaching a
yeah.
virtual class
Oh, cool.
later.
Okay.
But any other questions that you wanted to ask? Because that was interesting. I really liked.
Oh, cool. Well, nothing is coming to my mind right now. So
Perfect.
if there's any questions in the chat or anything like that.
If we can deviate just a little bit,
Yeah.
earlier you mentioned to me that you were part of a group called the Reformation Project involving LGBT members in the church. I would love to hear more about that.
Yes, and actually I'm not like an official person for them yet. Like that, and maybe I won't be. They kind of we're kind of going through like a studying process.
Got it.
So, but this group is the Reformation Project is working for LGBTQ inclusion in the church. And so really they're just trying to educate people and kind of like talk out like and reach out to people who've been more conservative on these issues. And so they're kind of training up other people to do that. And so like I'm in their little group that's studying, and we're kind of discussing and talking about how we can like work for LGBTQ inclusion. So like I'm not an official spokesperson for
Right.
them or anything. So but that's
You're
the
like
group
an
that
ally
I'm.
or a supporter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yep.
And with your work, if you were to join them like as an official
Yeah.
member, what would you hope to do through them? Like, what are some of your goals or some things that are important to you?
Well, I think it's a great tragedy that so many gay and trans people have been rejected from the church, or have been in even in churches that are loving and kind. They still haven't had much of a place in church, and that is, to me, is like really devastating. And I think this is like it is a great tragedy that evangelical Christians have been known for kind of being anti-gay. And so like what I would like to see is gay people, trans people, people being able to feel and experience God's love, God's presence, and full inclusion in Christian churches.
And that's awesome. I think that's really wonderful. The last episode that I just posted of my podcast was with my sibling-in-law, who
Yes.
is a trans person. They came out as non-binary about 2 years ago. And I know that a lot of their disappointments and their struggles with their process of coming out involved the religion that their parents were a part of and the church that their parents were a part of, and the fact that they knew that they wouldn't be accepted in that community. And so I think it's great. I think it's wonderful that people who are like you and who are very loud and proud about your faith and your Christianity, and it's all over your channel, which anybody watching that isn't familiar with your channel, it's the Bread of Life channel.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can approach these subjects that are oftentimes categorized as the antithesis of Christianity or the antithesis of like fundamentalist beliefs, and challenge those. One of the things I like about you, Rebeka, is that you challenge people on your side and off your side. You challenge people who maybe they're Christians, but they believe totally differently than you do as a Christian, or non-Christians. And you challenge them in a way that it's just very interesting and it's very entertaining, but not entertaining in like a oh, so and so destroy so and so, for views type way. I imagine that you have a lot of interesting conversations with people. I've seen some of them. I've been a part of some of them, but and I hope that is for everyone. I hope everyone has the opportunity to have the kind of conversations I feel like that you and I have with people, kind of on a regular basis, because I think it's fun and it's very important.
Yes. And, I think you are doing great work, Sydney. And I loved your conversation with EM. It was really good. And, the thing that I noticed when you guys were talking about your religious experience is that God wasn't part of it.
Right.
And that to me was really sad. And so I hope that, I'm glad that you've experienced goodness and things outside of the church, that like you don't feel that you need a religion to help you be a good person.
Right.
And I guess I don't think that religion and Christianity in particular is about helping us become good people. It's about helping us know who God is and to experience him. So that is, I'm, but I loved your conversation, and I was kind of binge watching your channel a couple days ago. So yeah.
Yay.
Cool.
I'm excited about that. Well, Rebeka, thank you so much for your time tonight. I always really enjoy talking to you. Every time I feel like we're about to have a conversation, I come up with even more questions. I think I've asked you everything there is to ask you, and then I think of more, and I always want to give you a chance to tell me and to tell the internet in your own words. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your transparency. And I hope everybody in the chat had a great time listening to this. And if you like this conversation that we had, you can check out, she's got an episode on my podcast, Growing Up Fundie. And then I have a stream on her channel, Bread of Life. And I encourage you to check out both channels and leave comments and likes and subscribes. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yep. It was awesome. Thank you, Sydney.